In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and create this crisscross pattern and frame pattern for our wooden crate. So let's go ahead and jump back into our document that has our two wooden pieces of texture. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a shadow line along the edge of both of these. So I'm going to zoom in there. And using my marquee tool, I'm going to go ahead and make a selection all the way down this side that selects this whole purple side, like so. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill that in with our dark purple that we selected before for our shadow. So I'll fill that in, and then I'm going to use my marquee tool again, and I'm going to click within the center of my selection, and that's going to allow me to take that selection and move it to wherever I like without moving the content within it. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill in on the other piece of wood, just like I did before, like so. So that's going to help us differentiate between the two pieces of wood when we're using them. Now let's go ahead and use our marquee tool to select one of these and copy it. Then we'll bring it into our document. Then let's go ahead and shrink that down with our transform tool. Now for our crisscross pieces, we're going to have to rotate these. The way you rotate is by coming up to the corner of your transform selection, and you'll see you get this bent arrow sort of icon. What we want to do is we want to rotate it by clicking and dragging like so. But if you just click and drag, it's going to not necessarily be in the exact angle that you want it. So what we're going to do is we're going to undo that. And what we want to do is we want to hold down Shift as we rotate. And what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to rotate into standard angles. So if I hold down Shift and then start rotating, you'll see this little tab up here, the black one. It says -15 degrees. I can go again, and now it says -30, and now it says -45. And that's what we want. We want it to be at a 45-degree angle. Now let's go ahead and move that into place, and then we can go ahead and start shrinking that into the correct size. So remember to hold down Shift to keep its proportions. Now this piece of wood isn't long enough, so what I can do is I can grab this little tab on the end here, and I can just pull that out like so. Same with the other side. Perfect. Let's go ahead and hit enter. Great. Now let's go ahead and grab our other piece of wood. And we'll go ahead and copy that, paste that in. Let's shrink it down, and we're going to do the exact same thing that we did with our other plank of wood. So hold down Shift, rotate to 45 degrees, get that into place. Then we're going to stretch that out, so I'll grab this tab and pull it out there, and pull it out there. Now we can go ahead and hit enter. Now let's turn these off to see which way these are going. So this guy needs to be on top of that guy, so I'm going to drag this layer underneath, and that works just perfect. Next, let's go ahead and add in our frame pieces. So I'm going to come back into my document, and I'll copy this guy. Then I'm going to paste him in like so. And what we want to do is we want to keep this shadow side on the inner side of our document. So this piece of wood is going to go on this side. So let's shrink him down. About there should be good. Now we're going to shrink it down until it lines up with the top and bottom of our crate. Now let's go ahead and hit enter. And what we want is we want this edge right here to be lined up with the drawing line that's underneath it. So right there. So it seems like it's already pretty lined up. And what we're going to do now is we're going to turn down the opacity on that layer so we can see this other edge. Now using our marquee tool, we're going to go ahead and select up to that black edge. And then we're going to go ahead and hit delete. Now, we did delete the purple edge, which is kind of our shadow edge, but that's okay, because in this case, we actually don't want to have a shadow edge on the corners of our crate, or the edges of our crate. So this works perfectly. Let's turn that back up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take this and copy it. And then we're going to go ahead and paste it. And then we want to rotate it 90 degrees, like so. Now we're going to drag that into place over here. We'll hit enter. Perfect. Now we have a little bit hanging out over the edge on this guy, so we're going to come back to his layer. Using my marquee tool, I'll just go ahead and delete that. Great. Now we need to drag both these layers up so that they're not being covered by these crisscross pieces of wood. So I'll select both of them, and I'm going to drag them up above both of those pieces of wood. Next, let's go ahead and do the other side and the top side. So I'm going to select my other piece of wood now and copy that and bring it in, shrink it down, and then we want to make sure that we have it in the correct proportions and also the correct size. So enlarge that to about there, hit enter, and then I'm going to go ahead and flip this because I want this darker side on the inside. So the way I do that is by using my transform tool, then right clicking and coming down to flip horizontal. So now that just flipped over to the other side. Let's go ahead and hit enter. Next, let's go ahead and turn down that opacity so we can see what's going on. And you'll see it's moving over the edge a little bit too much over here. So using my keys on my keyboard, I can go ahead and nudge that over. Then using my marquee tool, I'm going to go ahead and select up to that black edge and hit delete. Now you'll also see that this guy right here is hanging over a little bit too much. So I can come to that layer and hit delete also, and that just took care of that. Now let's come back up to this layer and turn the opacity back up so we can see what's going on. Perfect. Now we want this guy to be underneath this bottom plank of wood, so I'm going to drag him under like so. And now we're going to go ahead and copy this layer. So using my marquee tool, I'll select him, copy, and then let's paste him. And then we're going to rotate them 90 degrees, and this will be our top piece. So we'll put that guy right there and hit enter. Perfect. So now we have our pattern. Let's go ahead and merge all these layers together. So starting with the top one, I'm going to go ahead and come all the way down to my bottom layer, which is this guy, and select all of those. Then we'll go ahead and merge. So now those are all one layer. Next, let's go ahead and copy that layer, and let's drag a guy over like so, and let's make sure he's above our other texture patterns. And now we're going to go ahead and shape him and distort him so that he fits to our perspective. So using my transform tool, come into distort, we'll go ahead and line him up with our corners. And because we already have a square there that's basically the same size, it should click right into place, or just about. Perfect. Let's go ahead and hit enter. Fantastic. Let's make another copy of this pattern, and we'll drag him up to the top. Then we'll drag him over, and then we'll do the distortion once more. So that guy will be dragged to there, that guy to that corner, this one to that corner, and this one to that corner. Then we'll hit enter. Perfect. Now this is looking kind of flat, but don't worry, we're going to fix that in a second. The reason why it's looking flat is because there should be an edge on the edge of these planks of wood, as well as this top one and this bottom one. So we're going to add that in right now. So the way we do that is by coming over to our layers, and then we're going to hold down Control or Command, and then we're going to click our thumbnail on our layer. And now you can see what that does is it selects the entire shape on that layer. Next, we're going to add a new layer underneath that layer, and then we're going to go ahead and fill that in with our dark purple color that we had before. Now you can't see it because it's behind this layer, but if we unselect out of this and then use the grab and move tool and then use the arrow keys on our keyboard, we can nudge that out like so. Now you see that gives it a nice little edge. Now we also have this little bit that's sticking out over this edge, and we don't want that. So we're going to go ahead and select that and then hit delete. Perfect. Now let's do the same for the other side. So we're going to come to that layer, hold down Control or Command and select that thumbnail. So now we have our layer shape selected. Let's add a new layer underneath that, fill it in with our dark purple. Then using the arrow keys on our keyboard, we can go ahead and nudge that over. Great. Now, to make this look a little bit more interesting, we can also add a little bit of shading around the edges of each one of these triangles to make its pattern stand out. So the way we'll do that is exactly how we just added the shadow. The only difference is we're not going to move it, and we're going to blur the image. You'll see what I mean here in a second. So let's go ahead and come to our pattern layer, and we're going to select that shape, then add a new layer underneath it, and we're going to fill this in with black. Next, we're going to come into our filters, and we're going to come down to blur, and then we're going to come over to Gaussian blur. And now what that does is it adds a blur to our black image, but it also seeps some of that black out because it's blurring outwards. So let's go ahead and play with this, see how much blur we want. Somewhere about there should be good. We'll hit OK. But now you see we have a little bit sticking out over these edges, and we do not want that. So the way we'll take care of that is by coming down to this bottom wood layer, and we'll select that shape. Then making sure you're still on your black layer that we just created, we're going to go ahead and invert the selection. And if you remember, the way we invert the selection is by hitting Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I if you're on a Mac, and then we can go ahead and hit delete. And that gets rid of all of that area that was hanging out over the edge of our crate. Now we can also bring down the opacity on this layer if it looks like too much to you. So I'm going to bring it down to about 75%. Perfect. Now let's do the same for the other side. So I'm going to select that shape, add a new layer underneath it, fill it in with black. And now what I can do is, because I still have that setting set up in my filters, you'll see we have Gaussian blur right there. We can go ahead and click that, or we can hit Control F. And that will just apply the same effect with the same settings to our image. If you're on a Mac, you're going to hit Command F. Next, let's go ahead and select the under shape. So that would be this guy down here. So now that we have that shape selected, let's come back up to our shadow layer, and then we're going to invert the selection and hit delete. Then let's not forget to bring down the opacity so it matches our other side. So we'll bring it to about 75%. Perfect. All right, this is looking pretty good. Next, what we want to do is we want to add a shadow to one side. So we need to decide which side is going to be our highlight side and which side is going to be the shadow side. I'm going to pick this side right here as the shadow side, but you can pick whatever side you'd like. Now, before we do this, let's go ahead and merge all these layers together and also make a copy of all these layers. So I'm going to select all of them, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a copy. So now I have a copy of all of those layers, and then I'm going to put those into a folder, and then I can select all the rest of them and merge those together. So now I have one, if we turn this guy off, now I have one that's one whole piece, and if I turn this folder on, I have a folder that has all of my original pieces in it, so that way I can go ahead and change things later if I want. It's always important to keep all of your layers before you merge them. That way, if you ever need to change anything, you can. So let's come back to this one that we created. That's its own piece. So as you can see there, it's all one piece. And what we're going to do is we're going to select that shape. Then we're going to add a new layer above it. And what we want to do on this layer is we want to grab our color black and our brush tool. And I'm going to switch over to a hard-edged brush. And I'm going to paint a line straight down this side, a little bit too far over, like so. So we want it right on the edge of this side of our crate. And we can completely fill that in with black. And then we're going to go ahead and bring down the opacity on that to about there. And what we can do to make this look even more interesting is we can change our blend mode from normal to overlay. And that's just going to apply that color that's underneath it to our value. So let's play with the opacity real quick and see what looks best. Something about there I think looks pretty interesting. Next, let's go ahead and add a little bit of some cool color to our shadow. So I'm going to add a new layer above this, and then I'm going to select my black layer. So now I have this little area selected where our shadow is, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill that in with a blue. So somewhere in there, I'll come more down to the blues. Actually, let's keep it in the purples. Go ahead and hit OK, and then I'm going to fill that in like so. Now I'm going to change that layer to overlay, and I'm going to bring my opacity down. Now that's looking a little bit too violet for me, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill that in with more of a blue color, and I think that will give me more of the purple color that I'm looking for. Yep, there we go. Now let's bring the opacity down on that. It's a little bit too much for me. So about 50% should be good. Great. Now let's go ahead and merge all of these layers together. So now that's all one layer. And let's have a look at this at 100% scale. So I'll just hit Alt to zoom out, and I'll click until it comes out to 100%. And that's what it's going to look like in your game. All right, you just created your first game asset in Photoshop. I hope you're really proud of yourself and excited. Now, in the next lecture, we're going to go over how to create even more advanced textures for your wooden crate. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and create the texture for our crate. Now, this is going to be a very simple texture to create, and after we create this texture and apply it to our drawing, we're going to go ahead and get into more advanced texture creation, and we'll apply that to our crate also. So you're going to get a taste for two different styles of texture in this section of the course. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The first thing we want to do is we want to create a new document. So I have a new document here that's 800 pixels by 800 pixels. And the first thing we want to do is add a new layer. Then using my marquee tool, I'm going to go ahead and create a rectangle, like so. Now what this rectangle is for is we are going to create the individual planks that are going to make up our wooden crate. So the first thing we want to do is we want to select our color. So I'm going to come to my color picker, then I'll come into my purples, and I'm going to come down to about there, and we want it to be pretty desaturated. Go ahead and hit OK. This is going to be our shadow color, and shadow colors tend to be desaturated. So let's go ahead and fill that rectangle in. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my highlight color. So my highlight color is going to be sort of an orange color. This is also going to be pretty desaturated, but not as desaturated as my purple. So about there should be good. Then let's go ahead and create a new layer and fill this in with our orange color. And then we can go ahead and use our transform tool to shrink that down. Remember to hold down Shift to keep its proportions. And in this case, we actually don't want to keep the proportions. We want it to become a little bit skinnier. Otherwise, we're not going to keep the same distance between the edges on the top and the side. So let's go ahead and hit OK. Then we'll use the arrow keys on our keyboard to nudge that into place. And what we're looking for is we're trying to get it into the center. Great. Now you may be wondering why we're using sort of this orangish pinkish color and this purple to create a wooden crate. Well, a lot of the times it's a lot more interesting to use colors that are a little bit different than what you would normally see. Also, the reason for the outline on our wood, which is going to be shadow, the reason why it's going to be purple is because, like we said before, we want our shadows to be cool colors. And the more vibrant and exaggerated they are, the more interesting your artwork is going to look. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to merge these two layers together. And then we're going to copy this layer. So now we have two. Next, let's go ahead and create a wood texture. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to select a black. Then using my brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and start painting in some wood grain on a new layer, like so. Now, if you don't know what wood grain looks like or you're having a hard time envisioning it, go ahead and do a Google search for wood grain and use that as a reference. It's very important to use reference when you're creating artwork. All the greatest artists use reference. So just remember, whenever you're in doubt, go ahead and look at some reference. For the most part, wood grain is going to be very random looking. So do not worry about it being perfect by any means. Great. Now let's do the same for the other side. Now we're going to be reusing these, and I think this knot right here, or this eye, it's going to be way too prominent and recognizable when we reuse this plank of wood. So I'm going to redo this area right here. So just taking my erase tool, go ahead and erase that. And I'll just go ahead and brush in something a little bit less noticeable. Like so. Great. Now, I know this isn't looking very good, but we're going to do something to it here in a second that's going to make it look amazing. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and merge these two planks of wood together. So now those are one. And then we want to go ahead and select the shape on our layer by holding down Control, or if you're on a Mac, you're going to hit Command, and then clicking your thumbnail on the layer. And now you see we get this dotted line going around our shapes. What we're going to do now is we're going to invert the selection. So at the moment we have selected the inside of these planks. We want to select this outside area. So we're going to hold down Control-Shift-I, and now you can see that just swapped it to this outside white area. You can tell because there's a dotted line around the outside of your document. And if you're on a Mac, it's going to be Command-Shift-I. And the reason why we wanted to flip this is because we want to delete this black area that's sticking off the edges of our planks. So now if we go ahead and switch up to our top layer, which has our wood grain on it, we can go ahead and hit delete, and that will get rid of all of that. Great. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this layer. So we'll go Control J, and then we're going to bring up our hue and saturation panel by hitting Control U, or Command U if you're on a Mac. And now what we can do is we can change the saturation, the lightness, and the hue of our layer. What we want to do is we want to change our black to white. Then we'll go ahead and hit OK. So we still have our black one underneath. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take our black and we're going to nudge it over 1 pixel, like so. Then we're going to take our white and nudge it over 1 pixel in the opposite direction. Next, we're going to go ahead and take our white layer and drag it underneath the black layer. This way it gives us more of a crack canyon sort of effect. Next, let's go ahead and merge these two layers together. And then we have a little bit sticking off the edges because we nudged them over. So what we want to do now is we want to select our shape once more for our planks. Invert that selection by hitting Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I if you're on a Mac. Then we'll go ahead and hit delete, and you couldn't really see it because it's being covered up by the dotted lines, but that just took care of the little bit that was sticking off the edges. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to change our blend mode from normal to overlay. And then we're going to bring our opacity down to about 62%. Great. So now we have our two wooden planks. Next, what we want to do is we want to start moving these into our document. So first, let's merge both these layers together so that it's easier to bring these over into our other document. Next, I'm going to go ahead and select one of these with my marquee tool. Then I'm going to copy it by hitting Control-C on my keyboard, or if you're on a Mac, it's going to be Command-C. Then we're going to come back into our drawing file, and let's go ahead and paste that in by hitting Control-V or Command-V. Then we're going to use our transform tool to shrink that down. And the first thing we want to do is we want to make this back part of our wooden crate. So this area in these triangles is going to be the back part where we have slats of our boards going across. Now our light source is going to be coming from the top. So we want to make sure that we have this highlight edge on our wood grain on this side. If it's on the other side, it's going to look like the light source is coming from the bottom. So let's go ahead and put that into place. Then we're going to hold down Shift and shrink it down. We hold down Shift to keep its proportions. Then once we get it to the right spot and size, we'll go ahead and hit Enter. And then let's do the same thing again with our other wooden plank. So using my marquee tool, I'll go ahead and select that, copy it, and paste it. Now we can go ahead and shrink that down. So we'll turn on our transform tool and do like we did before with our other plank. Let's rotate it. Make sure that you have your highlight on the bottom side of your grain. Get it lined up. And remember to hold down Shift as you shrink it to keep its proportions. Then once we get it into place, we'll go ahead and hit Enter. And then let's go ahead and merge these two layers together. Now I'm noticing that the crack between each one of these boards is not dark enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and zoom in there. Then I'm going to select this purple and I'm going to grab a really dark version of it. So somewhere down here should be good. Then switching over to my brush tool, and I'm making sure that I'm on my pencil tool right here. And then shrinking my brush size down to 1 pixel, I'm going to click there and then hold down Shift and come straight across like so. Now I'm going to do this once more just to darken it a little bit more. And then I'll do the same thing for the bottom side here. So I'll click, drag across, click, and drag across. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and copy these two by selecting them, copying them, and then we're going to drag it up like so. And then we need one more up here, so I'll just go ahead and copy another one in. Then I'm going to bring down the opacity on this layer up here where it says opacity, so I'll bring that down to about 48%. Doesn't really matter. We just want to see the drawing behind it so we know where to cut this off at, which will be right there. So we'll hit delete. Then we can bring the opacity back up on that layer. Great. Now let's go ahead and merge all these layers together. So I'm going to select them all and merge them. So now that's one layer. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and copy this layer, and then we're going to drag the copy over like so. So now we just want to apply this to our box, just like we did before with our drawing. So we're going to turn on our transform tool, right click, and come to distort. And then we're just going to drag each one of these corners into the corners of our drawing, like so. And so now our texture has conformed to the correct perspective. Let's go ahead and hit Enter. Let's go ahead and do this for our other surface. So we're going to come back down to this layer and we'll go ahead and copy it. And we'll drag that copy over and we'll line it up. Then use our transform tool and distort. We'll bring that up to that corner. Just get everything into the correct position. Perfect. Let's go ahead and hit Enter. Now let's go ahead and grab this layer right here that has our drawing on it. We're going to drag that underneath all these so we can see what's going on. Alright, this is looking pretty good. In the next lecture, we're going to go ahead and create the outside frame and the crisscrossing planks, and then we're going to add a little bit of dimension to those, and then we'll also add some light and shadow to our crate to make it look a lot more realistic. Thanks for watching this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.